Hi, everyone. Welcome to Go Local Live for the 4 o'clock show here in downtown Providence. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in as we head down just outside the Beltway to the University of Virginia's Jennifer Lawless, who actually happens to be in D.C. at the moment. Jennifer, thank you for joining us.
I'm happy to be with you.
Glad to have you here. A few developments in the Trump administration front before we turn to politics and 2020. Just this afternoon revealed that the House Oversight Committee has issued subpoenas to the White House regarding recent revelations about how the Trump administration handled security clearances. Do we expect anything to come of this?
I don't know if anything will come of it in terms of the substance of those clearances, because it's the president's prerogative to determine who he issues the security clearance to and who he does not within the White House. But I do think that this highlights a broader phenomenon of this White House doing whatever it wants, and no issue being more important than how Donald Trump determines for a particular day that issue falls on his radar screen. And so we're talking about more than 24 security clearances of people who had been denied access, including Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. So I think this is one more example that the Democrats will try to put in front of the American people as evidence that this president and this administration more broadly are willing to disregard experts, are willing to disregard the rule of law, the rule of norms, and are willing to do whatever they think is politically expedient or necessary on a day-to-day basis.
Do you think this particular issue resonates with the average American as it pertains to, as you just said, the potential overreach from the administration, disregard, as you've said, that these clearances had been denied and then allowed? Or does it really depend on the voter? Does it depend on how it's couched?
Look, we've gotten to the point in American politics where Republicans are going to vote for Trump no matter what. He was right. He could kill somebody on Fifth Avenue. And Democrats are going to vote against Trump no matter what. But these are the kinds of issues that can make the Democratic base feel enthusiastic, get out to the polls, and really ensure that they do everything they possibly can to end the administration and to keep Donald Trump from serving a second term. It's also possible that some independent voters, especially those in battleground states, will see this as just an extension of Trump behaving badly in the White House and disregarding people who know more about him on a variety of issues. And we've always had presidents who have deferred to the generals when it comes to the military, who have deferred to the CIA and the FBI when it comes to justice issues, who have deferred to the State Department when it comes to diplomacy. And this administration does not do that. And I think that flies in the face of a lot of voters' expectations of what they want in their White House.
So let's continue along with the Trump administration. Just announced that the president is not going to look to push through health care reform until after the next election. Now, this issue had been dominating the news cycle recently. Democrats geared up for any potential changes or weakening of the ACA. Let's talk a little bit about the politics of this. Of course, this is something that the president had run on the last time. Does this present an issue for him, yes or no, to his base?
I mean, you've got to hand it to this president. What he did was remarkable. He ran on repeal and replace. He failed at repealing and replacing. The Mueller report comes out. He decides he's going to repeal and replace again. He finds out 2 days later that he can't do that because Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats control the House. So he says, oh, we're going to fulfill our first-term promise of repealing and replacing after 2020 when I get reelected and the Democrats lose and Republicans have unified government again. And everyone's like, okay, and doesn't really focus on it that much because by tomorrow we're going to be talking about something else. So, I think basically this is an issue where the Republicans lose if health care is front and center. The overwhelming majority of people want coverage for pre-existing conditions. That's true of Democrats and Republicans. And it's a lot harder to take something away from people than to give it to them in the first place. So the biggest obstacle right now is that Obamacare exists and it's chipping away at something that people have become accustomed to. So I don't see how that gets through when you have divided government. And frankly, it couldn't get through when Trump had unified government. So I think deciding to punt on this is the strategic thing to do. Why he introduced it in the first place, though, demonstrates the ease with which he's willing to manipulate and use the news cycle to his advantage, or to at least say to people, oh, don't focus on the Mueller report. There's a lot of other stuff going on.
Well, let's talk about that. That was going to be my next question here. Of course, the president did take a victory lap when AG Barr had released that 4-page letter showing, again, no collusion with the administration with Russia. But of course, now the push is to see that full report. Democrats are demanding this release. They're demanding that Barr testify as to why he wasn't even looking to release the full document. Could there still be any there, as you said, saw the president change the dialogue super quickly and tack to healthcare, again, after taking probably a small victory lap, but then, again, going off in a completely different direction?
There probably is there. Remember that Bob Mueller did not exonerate the president on obstruction. He said that there were arguments on both sides. Adam Schiff and other members of the Congress and the congressional leadership have said that Trump's public statements constitute collusion. It's just that collusion is not a legal term. So unless there was conspiracy, Mueller couldn't charge him with that. But none of this really matters, because at the end of the day, Mueller issued a report, even if we all see everything that's in it, that didn't generate any indictment or set of consequences explicitly for the president. And that's what the Republicans care about, and that's what Donald Trump cares about. So I think it's going to be very difficult for the Democrats to make this an issue, unless there is, it turns out, some smoking gun in the report that Mueller just couldn't really use based on what his charge was.
And so let's tack from the current administration to, again, people eyeing the next election cycle. Let's talk a little bit about, you had some comments. We knew this was coming. Former Vice President Joe Biden potentially looking to make a run. Again, people bringing up all these examples from his past, and now even new ones seeming to come out as well, of the sort of the Uncle Joe. Is that pretty much what it's referred to? That, you know, kind of handsy. And you had your own thoughts about what Joe Biden has done in the past and where that stands in 2019.
Well, I think generally speaking, the Democrats have to make a decision. And they have to decide whether they believe that people can evolve and change given a different political context and different societal circumstances, or whether they believe that anything that people have done in the past disqualifies them moving forward. And this is a hard case because we know in the Me Too movement that it's important to listen to women. We know that it's important to recognize that women have often felt disempowered and unable to articulate concerns that they had or things that made them uncomfortable in the past. And we've moved beyond that, and that's great. By the same token, Joe Biden says that he never meant to make anybody feel uncomfortable. Nobody ever told him he was making them feel uncomfortable. And now that he knows this, he's willing to reform his behavior. So that's a pretty substantial mea culpa and a promise to behave differently. What the Democrats have to decide is whether that's enough. And you know, it's tricky to determine whether it's enough. But if we think back to Ralph Northam and the racism and the racist incidents from a month ago, his apology was not sufficient, and he didn't indicate that he had grown or that he had been willing to change. And it seemed at that time that the rhetoric coming out of the Democratic Party was that he botched the apology. It wasn't the acts themselves. So let's see. This is where the rubber meets the road, and we'll see if the Democrats are actually willing to give Joe Biden a pass on his previous behavior, assuming that there are no incidents sort of post-Me Too.
How much do you think this might be inside baseball of Democratic opponents, a handiwork behind the scenes trying to cap Joe Biden at the knees before he even makes an announcement?
Oh, I mean, if I had to put money on it, I would say this is all Bernie Sanders. Right? Like, there's...
Does it have his fingerprints?
Right. I mean, I just don't think we have... I think the Sanders campaign could reliably conclude and, you know, plausibly conclude that there's no room for both of them in this primary. I'm less concerned about that as a Democrat than I am Donald Trump spending the next year at rallies referring to creepy Uncle Joe and making fun of and mocking the kinds of things that these women have said Joe Biden did. And, you know, the irony is not lost, by the way. Remember the Access Hollywood tapes. But Donald Trump doesn't play by the rules that a normal person plays by, so he's going to have no problem whatsoever condemning Biden for this behavior, even though his own behavior is comparing apples to oranges.
And you mentioned an interesting point of going back to the Virginia political climate. I believe there was just a piece in the New York Times taking a look at where did that story go. Of course, we knew, and we've talked about this It was the story dominating the news cycle of 3 top elected officials facing serious scrutiny for behavior. And now here we are in April. Again, we did see a couple of the accusers of the lieutenant governor come forth for some press again as well. But things have died down considerably. Does this issue go away for Joe? As you said, can Trump carry the water on this issue? And that's all that's really needed is for him to be continually reintroduce it? Is it McCain-esque in sort of the fixation on a particular person or a vantage point that he'll continue to chip away at if Joe runs?
I think so, but I also think that it's one of these things that people knew about a little bit to begin with. And so it's feeding into predispositions that people already had about Joe Biden. And that's what makes it tricky for him, because he has to acknowledge that he did this, but he can't, and he has, and he's said that, he didn't know. But he can't sort of use a defense of, oh, well, those were the good old days. That's what we used to do back then. Because he also can't be in a position where he portrays himself as this old guy who shouldn't be running for president right now, who's a relic from the past. And so, it's not a particularly terrific place to be in. We all did know it was coming. Joe Biden must have known that it was coming. And so I expect that they're prepared. And the fact that his apology was much more polished than Ralph Northam's regarding racism is a perfect example. I mean, and then think about it. Ralph Northam, a couple of weeks later, says, oh, I'm really beginning to understand the roots of racism. I'm reading Roots. I mean, can you imagine if Joe Biden came out in 2 weeks and said, I really didn't know anything about this, but I'm reading The Feminine Mystique and I'm learning a lot, right? I mean, like, that just would not fly. It's ridiculous. And so, the path that he's on suggests that he's aware of this and that, it's going to be something that he's going to try to address head on and hopefully move on from.
And so before we let you go, we still have to talk politics. As you said, you think the Sanders campaign might have fingerprints all over this. The recent quarter just closed. Now, the reports aren't due until mid-April, but campaigns are announcing, again, this pivotal period and what they were able to bring in. Sanders seemed to have a significant fundraise.
$19 million in a quarter is not too shabby. It's interesting to me, too. The candidates who released their numbers early are the candidates that have every reason to be very, very proud of how much they've raised.
Of course, if you're not coming up with numbers and you're hiding something.
Right, or you at least know that you're not going to, you don't want to be the story for the next 2 weeks while we're waiting until the April 15th reporting period.
Yep.
And so, my bet is that all of the candidates raised enough to continue to compete well into the next quarter. But it will be in the next quarter that we start seeing debates. And my sense is that we'll start to see somewhat of a winnowing process at that point, too. But Bernie Sanders has every reason to believe that right now he's positioned as a very, very solid top-tier candidate, and that the people who supported him in the past are willing to give it a shot again. That you don't raise $19 million without a loyal donor base. And so his supporters from 2016 are clearly ready to go.
So before we catch you this time next week, what are we going to be keeping an eye on down inside the Beltway?
Well, I think if we're still talking about Joe Biden, it's a bad thing for Joe Biden, and he probably won't run. If we're not talking about Joe Biden, then he probably managed to get out of this, and he'll be announcing a candidacy on April 16th after the fundraising numbers come in. I think we'll also have a little bit more information about these House investigations, not only about Barr testifying, not only about the White House clearances, but also Adam Schiff and, sort of what he's doing in terms of trying to further investigate issues of obstruction.
Well, as always, we appreciate getting to catch you when we can, wherever you may be. But Professor of Political Science Jennifer Lawless at the University of Virginia, we appreciate, as always, you're taking the time to Skype in.
Of course.
Okay, we're going to let Jennifer Lawless go. We're going to be right back here with our next guest here in downtown Providence.